Welcome to Doc9 Tech Talks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Lusted. I'm Managing Director of Doc9, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Gareth Narinesingh, who is Commercial Director at Yoti, to discuss digital identification. Yoti is a company we've kept a keen eye on in recent years in the emerging digital ID space, and I saw they recently launched an initiative focused on helping financial services companies adopt the technology. So a perfect time to get them on the podcast to explore this topic in a bit more detail. So Gareth, thanks for joining us. Do you want to start by giving us a bit of a background about yourself and Yoti?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and good morning to you. Good morning to everyone listening to this. My name's Gareth. I'm Commercial Director for Financial Services at Yoti. Yoti is a digital identity platform. We are one of actually many players within this niche technology space. But I like to think that Yoti has a USP, and that is we are promoting the use of portable and reusable digital identity for consumers all over the world. It's free to use. We give everybody in the world the right to own their digital identity on their phone through our Yoti app. And we have a network base of about 7 million global users at the moment, of which approximately 1.5 million in the UK.
Great, so you've got great reach already. Do you want to start, for those that aren't familiar with the concept of digital ID, just giving an overview of the concept?
Yeah, so when you think about every time you go to a hotel to check in, you have to give your passport, and the person over the other side takes a copy of your passport and holds that record. And you don't know what they've done to that. You don't know how long they're holding it for. You really don't know what happens to that photocopy at all. And if you're like me, then that's a bit of a concern, because quite frankly, I'm quite protective about my personal information. I like to know that my personal information is being treated with the privacy and security that it requires. And quite frankly, those paper-based systems don't really work. So I'm now in the dark as to where my details are, who's got access to them, and in fact, whether there's an impersonation risk out there. I'm sure many people have had the unfortunate circumstance of waking up to find that someone's got access to their email or access to their bank account. Digital identity promotes the use of private and secure use of your personal information. So, for example, the Yoti app, it's free to download. You onboard with Yoti once and once only, and we prove that you are a real person and that you're the person who you say you are. And once you have been given your Yoti, because Yoti has assured that you are a verified person, you have a verified identity, you can then take your identity on your phone and share that through digital means with whomever you want, and whomever actually chooses to trust that Yoti has done their job properly. So use cases are many, really, across the private and public sector. Yoti is predominantly focused on private sector, but we have relationships with two governments, in particular the states of Jersey and the Scottish Improvement Services, whereby you can use your Yoti to file an online tax form, for example, or get access to local authorities' services. But in the private sector, we're working really with financial services firms to use your personal information for KYC onboarding. So that's through electronic KYC. Also, we're pretty big in crypto, gaming and gambling. All of the sectors now fall under the money laundering directive. So they have obligations, regulatory requirements in that regard. Also through things like retail, so for age verification of goods, and airports and borders. So we've been working with some pretty major airports around the world, particularly in the UK actually, to prove the concept of seamless travel, where you can check in with your Yoti and you can walk through the airport onto a flight without having to get your passport out. It's simply using facial recognition because you've checked in that way. So lots of really exciting use cases spanning lots of different industries.
Yeah.
I think the digital identity is still quite nascent globally, but actually people have become a lot more aware of it, and are moving from beyond exploration into understanding how to procure such services.
I think those that have sort of dipped the toes in signing up for accounts with challenger banks, or even you mentioned crypto, Coinbase or similar, have gone through that process of holding up your driving license or passport, and then doing the facial recognition, moving ahead, and that process. And I think most of the tools have similar functionality, right? That's the kind of foundation of your.
That's right. So if you become akin to opening up a bank account with the likes of Monzo or Revolut, and you find yourself in that generation whereby you want to transact and do most of your activities on your phone, then you'll be already familiar with digital identity, whether you know of it as a term or not. And I think this is what that particular generation has come to expect now.
Yeah.
So they expect more services to be performed digitally. They don't necessarily want to walk down to a branch or appear or make an appointment to do something face to face. It can all be done digitally, and the key to that is unlocking the verified identity of that individual.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. So you mentioned, I think you said 7 million users at the moment of the app. You mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So I guess most of those aren't within financial service applications at the moment. So before we move on to financial services, I'm really interested actually to hear a little bit more around the Jersey case study, which you mentioned, so in the Channel Islands. So what's the usage in Jersey of Yoti? What's the kind of real world kind of use cases?
Well, if you actually go to Jersey right now, you'll see the Yoti sticker in most convenience stores and supermarkets, and that's principally because Yoti is being used to age verify someone. So again, we'll come back to privacy of information. If I went to go to a supermarket to buy alcohol or tobacco or energy drinks, these are age restricted goods. And so the first issue is that when I get to the checkout, somebody has to be looking at my ID, and I can show them my ID. And to be honest, unfortunately, you can purchase really good, sophisticated fake ID documents for not a lot of money these days. You can go onto the web or the dark web and you can buy something very good. And if you're not trained to look at that document, then you're not understanding, the security features. You can't see signs of tampering, and it's kind of like you need specific training to be able to do that. So Yoti takes that off the hands of the person at the till or the checkout. So we make sure that we verify that person according to their government issued photo ID. The second point is that if I do have to go to checkout and show you my ID, I'm actually giving away more information than I really ought to. You don't need to know my name, my address. You don't need to know my passport number. You don't even need to know my date of birth. All you need to know is that I am over the age of 18 or 16. And so the Yoti app works in that way. So when we integrate with as we call the relying party can actually set, as part of their kind of setup, what information they're asking for. And according to GDPR, you are only supposed to be asking for minimal data. So actually, I don't need to know your name. I just need to know that you are over the age of 16 to buy this energy drink. And indeed, that is what the user is then sharing. It's a credential that says I'm over the age of 16. And as long as there's trust in the system and trust in the digital identity platform and the way that Yoti, the methodologies Yoti applies to verifying identity, then it's very quick, convenient for both the user and the retailer. But just coming back to Jersey again, so we've been procured by the states of Jersey government, and we believe that something like about 30,000 people in Jersey now have the Yoti app, so it's a great proof of concept for us. And the most recent utility that we gave Jersey-based residents is to file their online tax returns. So very important utility there.
Cool. Sounds like a good early success story. So I guess if we focus in on the financial services sector, that last point kind of highlights the kind of second use case. I think the obvious use case is around onboarding new customers, and I think your product also combines it with automated KYC, AML check, sanction search, etc. And as mentioned earlier, many challenger banks have adopted this technology. I guess the second use case is probably around ongoing authentication. So when users log into portals or want to make a payment or etc., and really around minimizing fraud. What does Yoti think the opportunities are within financial services?
Well, I mean, I don't really often like to sort of spout statistics, but there was a paper last year that McKinsey released and suggested that by 2024, digital identity was going to be a $100 billion industry globally. And I think that's, as more people become, attached to their phones, more people rely upon the internet and apps to, go about their way of life. And I think of that 100 billion, they attributed something like $25 billion of that to financial services. So there is an unprecedented potential to kind of tap into that particular market, which is starting to wake up. Financial services, hasn't until recently been known for, its sophistication in terms of technology, but the way forward is being pretty much forged by the fintech. So the fintechs have to kind of explore a different way of doing things. They need to adopt different solutions to deliver better customer experience, better UX, and deliver customer acquisition strategies. And they're doing that through digital identity. What we find is that most fintechs rely upon the concept of embedded white label digital identity. So they take the technology from a third party provider and they plug it into their back end. So I come to your portal and I can do my digital identity and verify myself through you. But if I wanted to do that through the next fintech or the next service provider, I do the whole thing again, which is a little bit kind of frustrating for the user because it means that, I'm having to prove myself time and time again. So Yoti is championing this concept of portable, reusable digital identity. You download the Yoti app once and that's it. And then all you have to do is share your credentials with the relying party, and that can be done very simply through scanning the QR code and consenting to share the information that's requested. And that share is automated, it's automatic, it's in real time, and I can be sort of onboarded, in a fraction of a second rather than have to sort of complete my details time and time again. So we're using that as the basis for eKYC. So obviously identity verification is integral part of that, but actually you need to then do a lot more work, such as due diligence. Do I appear on a PEPs list, a sanctions list? Do I appear on adverse media? Do I have any fraud indicators against my verified identity? So Yoti is plugging in an engine in the background that says, right, once we know who you are, let's find out as much as we can about you, and once we've kind of found out as much as we can about you, let's put it through a risk assessment engine and deliver out an outcome. So am I low risk, medium risk, high risk? And clearly those risk indicators are developed in tandem with the relying party. So the bank will obviously make sure that their risk appetite and thresholds are being met accordingly. But we can, in real time, from the verified identity, deliver a risk assessment of that individual through our plugins with various other API sources. So that makes it a very compelling use case for eKYC. That means that once I've done that, I can just do it again and again and again for insurance, credit cards, loans, mortgages as well, which I know we'll come on to. But I'd just like to cover the point about authentication because that kind of sits side by side with our solution. So once you know who I am because I've onboarded with you through my Yoti app, well, actually I can use my Yoti app to come back to you to re-authenticate myself. So it completely does away with this concept of username password. I simply scan a QR code to say that I'm a returning customer, i.e. logging into my online banking, show my face to the camera, and it authenticates me through my facial biometric. For a lot of people maybe listening to this podcast, that may sound like a work of science fiction, but I can assure you it's technology which is here today, it's being deployed today, and we really want to see more firms move towards this because it completely mitigates the risk of account takeover.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting point that I think the benefits are clear for users, much better user experience, faster. The benefits are clear for businesses. You kind of minimizing risk of fraud and having a smoother process, and delivering great UX is also a good competitive advantage as well. So aside from challenger banks, why do you think the industry has been relatively slow to adopt this technology up until now?
Well, that's a great question, and I think the answer is quite straightforward because most of the buyers of this technology tend to be compliance officers or MLROs, and they at least have a decisive stake in making the decision to deploy digital identity technology. And I guess their concern is that is it fit for does it meet the regulatory requirements? What does the regulator think about that? And I think that up until last year, that was a very interesting point to debate. I think it's a lot clearer since January the 10th. So since January the 10th, we've had the transposition of the Fifth Money Laundering Directive into UK law. And the first time ever we saw in the Money Laundering Directives prescriptive, it supports use of digital identity platforms as third-party vendor solutions.
Yeah.
We then look to March 2020, and FATF released a very important paper on digital identity. It's about a 120-page exploration of digital identity, what it means for financial services. And we saw there that they are advocating the use of digital identity. We then most recently, in the month of June, had the republication of the JMLSG guidance. So that's a money laundering steering group, and that's a really crucial bit of legislation for the banks, because that's what they look to for best recommendation advice on practices to do with anti-money laundering. And that, for the first time, now prescribes digital identity platforms and the use of sophisticated anti-fraud techniques that these digital identity platforms deploy. And we are now kind of basically providing for within the Fifth Money Laundering Directive, recommended by FATF, and now we have a place in the JMLSG. So I think in terms of the regulatory requirements, we are there. That's no longer a point to debate.
Okay.
I think the second point to that, and probably this is something that we need to work with firms a little bit more closely on, is where digital identity sits with overall digital transformation. It's fair to say you can't just plug and play with digital identity. You need to be able to consume the identity data. That needs to be consumed within the bank's overall architecture, whether it's a speedy CRM tool or the compliance workflow. And I think firms who are on that journey and who are interested in digital identity need to figure out how to use digital identity and where it goes to within their system, plumbing it in, so to speak. That's been the main challenge to adoption.
It's interesting. I mean, your APIs and your competitors that we've looked at, fundamentally using your APIs is, it's not a complicated task, but as actually, as you say, plugging that in and working out the workflow within the institution and how that fits. And, there's regulatory, it seems like there's, some barriers that are coming down from a regulatory point of view. Something we've also heard is around some concerns around standardisation, I guess, because there's a couple of players in the market. You're one, and I think your model is slightly different from what we've seen in that the idea of the portable ID central authentication is a bit different from some competitors. But fundamentally, if we look at something like the mortgage sector, which we do a lot of work in, for example, the broker, lender, conveyancer, and the different parties in the journey have to do their own ID checks, and from a regulatory point of view. And so the customer has to give the same ID again and again to different parties, which often still paper-based. Do you see, the ideal journey would be you give it once at the beginning of the journey and that's passed on securely through tokens or similar later down to these other parties. Is there some form of standardization on the horizon, and how do you see that kind of playing out?
Yeah, the answer to that question is there absolutely is. And if I'm to be asked, what does, that particular kind of end-to-end journey look like in 2-3 years' time, I think it'd be completely transformed. So I think it'd be completely transformed through the use of digital identity. So, it's a real point of frustration for anybody, who has to buy a house or sell a house, and they're identifying themselves several times with the lender, the conveyancer, the solicitor, the estate agent, maybe the broker. And why can't we just join all that up and kind of do it once, fit for purpose way that suits everybody's needs? So that's exactly the use case that Yoti is working on at the moment.
Okay.
We're working in the UK with one of the biggest consolidations of UK mortgage brokers.
Okay.
And they kind of sit with 90 lenders actually behind them. And they also work with a number of developers and estate agents. And they're looking for kind of, the customer or, the client to do their identity verification and their mortgage agreement in principle in one fell swoop that everybody can then share that information, which belongs to the individual. It doesn't belong to the lender, it doesn't belong to the agent, it belongs to the individual. So that actually fits really nicely with the Yoti technology. So Yoti is an app, but actually underneath that, Yoti is a digital wallet. So we can put certain credentials into the wallet. It might be, your name, it might be your address, it might actually extend to kind of all kinds of other things, such as your university certificate, your medical records, right to stay, right to work, employer reference, etc. All these be issued into the wallet as credentials, as long as we trust in the issuing authority. So what if we took that concept and applied the issuing of a credential into the wallet to say that I am Gareth, I've been background checked, I know who I am, and actually I have an agreement in principle for a mortgage for up to £300,000. That's being done separately, independently, in a trusted way, and we can sort of peel back the layers on that if we have time. But actually, I can then use those credentials in my digital wallet to share that once with the estate agent, again with the mortgage broker, again with the mortgage lender, so on and so forth. So it becomes a much more convenient way for me to transact and go through various layers. And that is what I think the market will move towards, simply because the technology is available, it's there, it's cheap. And I think above all of that, it kind of puts the individual at the center of everything. It means that they are kind of, it's convenient for them and they're in control of the data in terms of privacy and security.
Okay, so yeah, I think the concept, I think we're both on the same page in terms of the validity of the concept. If we think about sort of furthering that standardisation thought a bit further along, so authentication applications for gov.uk, for example, a few years ago, they wanted to kind of decentralise, I guess, and have sort of standards for different identity providers. There was Experian and a few others, and that meant that there's a common set of standards that different providers would kind of meet, and they could be used. Do you see anything coming in terms of from government regulators or other kind of more standardisation between different identity providers as well?
I do, and as a first point to start that that conversation off. I think it's going to be really important down the line that we have a regulator for this industry. So the digital identity itself is not a regulated sector, but actually it's a supplier to many regulated sectors for much of their regulatory work. So for onboarding customers, whether it's financial services, property, recruitment, law firms. So we are a central vendor for many of those regulated sectors. So that itself, I think, requires the government to think about a regulator for digital identity. Digital identity platforms, there are probably 2 or 3 dozen globally, all who do things in slightly nuanced ways. So you're right, that is where a standard needs to be brought in to make sure that these guys are doing things to a certain level of assurance. And that is actually what we are seeing happening right now. So the government has released, or government digital services have released a set of protocols called GPG 45 for identity verification and GPG 44 for authentication. So many of the digital identity platforms are looking at those standards and they're looking at what they need to build and what further capabilities they need to develop in order to live up to their standards. Fortunately, Yoti is in a very good place. We believe that we meet those requirements of those standards in both 44 and 45, and we're waiting to understand the certification process around that. So there will be a central accreditation certification around meeting GPG 44 and 45, and we hope that as soon as that is released by Government Digital Services or the Cabinet Office, we can sign up to that.
It sounds like that could be, the next big big driver really of adoption. I think that would really take that would really help
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's something which needs to filter through the system. So when I'm speaking to compliance officers at banks, they're not asking me about GPG 45.
Yeah.
They're asking me about how I verify an ID, and they're trying to understand my methodology and trying to see if that is fit for purpose, which is absolutely fine, because in the event of no standards, you know, the private sector will turn to the private sector for innovative solutions, and that drives this industry, and that's a great thing. And the UK is in a really good place in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. In order to get trust, it does require government standards to be set and met, and accreditation, and that way businesses can become a lot more trusting in those digital identity platforms who have that accreditation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess if you think about COVID-19 and the situation at the moment, have you seen any kind of increased uptake in use of digital ID, or at least discussions around digital ID at the moment?
Yes, I mean, the answer is exponentially yes, because we were seeing an uptick in interest since January, really, from the Money Laundering Directive. We then saw, firms who were kind of looking from the outside in and just asking questions and exploring. They really started to get interested. So we're working on many proof of concepts at the moment, actually, which is a big change. It's a big step change from last year, where we found ourselves really as a sales function educating and raising awareness of what we were doing. This year, it's about kind of building stuff and understanding what client requirements are and regulatory requirements that clients want to pass through to us. So actually, that is a big step change. I think COVID has really moved this front and centre for many firms who hadn't heard about digital identity, or were only kind of had a very basic understanding of it. That's been completely changed by COVID, because I don't think the world is going to go back to the way in which it used to operate. I think transactions and registering for services is all going to be done pretty much exclusively online now, and that is the direction of travel. And I think that will actually drive and shape the future. So I think beyond just working with individual clients, my view is that in the next 3 years, maybe 5 years, I think the internet will have a layer above it. And that is, before you get onto the internet, you will need to verify who you are through digital identity. At that point, everything becomes that much more personalized for you. You don't need to kind of then log into your Amazon account or your Netflix account. It will already be there for you, because you've gone through your layer. And that layer, I think, will be based on biometric identity. I don't think it'll be based on username, password, or anything like that. I think it will be linked to your face or linked to some other means, but it will be, inherency that will drive that. And it's going to be seamless and frictionless and really wonderful UX for people.
Yeah, I think everyone's kind of recognised for a while now that the username password model of authentication just doesn't really work for human beings, to remember all these different variations, etc. So, it seems like this, really could help.
Yeah, and I think, the days of one-time PIN, one-time PINs can be intercepted. There's, fraud, sophisticated fraud tactics. As a second form of authentication, I think that needs to be done away with. And I think it's moving much more towards use of face.
Well, from a slightly selfish point of view, I live in the bit of the countryside and I don't have much phone reception. I often have these things where I have to get a text message, I have to go wandering around for 10 minutes around the village trying to get this pin, and I run back and then it's expired. And so I think that this type of technology, from a selfish point of view, would make my...
You're not the first person to have reported that as being a point of frustration.
Yeah. Cool. So we're nearly out of time today. I think it'd be really good to end on, if you've got any advice for companies that are thinking about starting on this journey, how would they make a start in approaching this? Sure.
So I think if you are looking to procure digital identity, then, first of all, good for you, because I think it's, it's the way forward. And, I'm very glad that you might be thinking this. Secondly, I think you need to sort of understand the market. So, as I said before, there are many different providers of digital identity, all who do things in a slightly different way. Some of them use data to verify the identity. So if I can build up as much data about you as possible, then I can authenticate who you are. Unfortunately, that leaves behind the 20% of people who are what we call thin file, who don't have records at the credit reference agencies, maybe those who've moved address in the last 6 months and that hasn't been updated at electoral roll. You're not going to get a verified identity through data. You are going to get 100% of digital identity verification through facial biometrics linked to passports or driving licenses or other government issued documents, which then have a photo that you can then match back to the face. So have a real think about and understand the digital identity platform that you're going to be using and the methods that they employ to verify the identity. Secondly, you'll need to think about where you are in terms of digital transformation. So it's very unlikely that you can simply just plug and play a digital identity platform. You need to think about the architecture of your systems and where your data goes to kind of know where and how to consume the digital identity attributes that firms like Yoti can give you. So for those firms transitioning from paper-based or manual base, that's quite a challenge. And so to have a wider strategy for digital transformation, which includes digital identity, is going to be really important. The third thing to think about, and this is quite an important point to think about, is if you are falling under the senior manager's regime, then there is a duty of care for one of the SNFs, usually the responsibility for procurement. I don't know whether that's the Chief Information Officer, the Chief Operating Officer, possibly even the Chief Compliance Officer, but you need to do your homework and validate that the platform of choice is robust enough and good enough so that you can be held to, if you are held to account by the regulator, then you need to have the evidence to back yourself up in terms of the decision you made to deploy digital identity. So the senior managers regime in that regard really has focused minds in many ways, but specifically for the procurement of third-party vendors, particularly technology providers.
Cool. And I guess going back to our sort of conversation earlier, that when that standardisation and starts to happen, that should kind of accelerate those, de-risk, I guess, that from a lot of companies.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're not far away from that. We're probably a good 6 months away from that.
Sounds really positive. And yeah, I think that was great food for thought for everyone and a good explaining on digital ID and Yoti. We'll certainly be keeping a close eye on your upcoming developments in financial services, and perhaps we'll have the opportunity to work together as well. So yeah, just to wrap up, thanks a lot for your time today, and we'll catch up hopefully soon.
Excellent. Wonderful to talk to you, Mark. Thank you.